There is a photograph that was never taken. A man and his daughter in a quiet house somewhere in Texas, watching a borrowed movie until she fell asleep on the couch beside him. He had forgotten to bring home the birthday cake he promised her. He did not know that night that it was the last one. Nobody told him. Nobody ever does. Tonight, friend, you have found Mr. K. Law. This is the quiet broadcast where the great characters of our time are remembered slowly and remembered fully. I am the keeper of their stories. You are the listener who does not need them to hurry. Before we begin, leave a thought below. Was Joel Miller a good man, a broken one, or something the world has no clean word for? And if you would like to find me again, the subscribe button is there. The light is low, the night is long, and the story is ready. His name was Joel Miller. Before everything else, before the survival, before the violence, before the decision that split the world in two, he was just a man who worked with his hands, raised his daughter alone, and kept a broken watch long after there was any reason to. This is his story, all three of them. He was born on the 26th of September in Arlington, Texas, a fact so ordinary that nobody would have written it down, had circumstances not later made it extraordinary. His full name was Joel Miller. He grew up in and around Austin, in the kind of neighborhood where the houses are close together and everyone knows which car belongs to which driveway, where the summers are long and heavy and the evenings smell like cut grass and someone else's barbecue drifting over the fence. He was not born into ease. His parents were absent, not dead, not dramatically gone, simply not there in the way that children need people to be there. The exact nature of their absence is never stated plainly in anything Joel ever said, which is itself a kind of answer. What is known is this: from a very early age, Joel was the one keeping things together. He looked after his younger brother Tommy, the way older siblings in struggling households do, not from obligation exactly, but from the understanding that if he did not, nobody would. The two of them had only each other for a long stretch of their early lives, and that fact shaped both of them in ways that would not fully reveal themselves until the world gave them something worth fighting for, or someone worth protecting. Tommy would later describe those years with the quiet affection of a man who knows how much he owes and cannot fully say it. Joel said very little about his childhood. He was not a man who looked backward easily. What he did carry forward, what survived the whole long wreckage of his life and never fully left him, was music. As a boy, Joel taught himself to play acoustic guitar. He was not a prodigy. He was not formally trained. He simply loved it, the way some people love things they found on their own without anyone pointing the way. He used to sing. He had a voice, a low, unhurried Texan voice that suited the guitar and suited him. And for a period of his childhood and early adulthood, his genuine aspiration was to become a professional singer. Not famous, necessarily. Not a stadium. Just someone whose voice carried across a room and made people stop what they were doing for a moment. That never happened. Life moved faster than the dream. He became a father at 21 years old. Sarah Miller was born in the late summer, and her mother left not long after. The details of that marriage, if it was a marriage, the record is deliberately thin, are among the very few things Joel refused to discuss, even with people close to him. Whatever happened between them was painful enough that he kept it entirely to himself for the rest of his life. What he did not keep to himself was Sarah. He took her. He raised her. He built the whole shape of his daily existence around her, without appearing to notice that he had done so, the way people sometimes make the most profound choices of their lives. without treating them as choices at all. He never went to college. There was no time and no money, and honestly, no version of the plan in which that fit. He went to work instead. Tommy, after serving a stretch in the United States military, he fought in Desert Storm, came back quieter than he left, returned to Austin, and joined his brother in the trades. The two of them worked as construction contractors, long hours on job sites, the kind of physical work that keeps a man strong well past the age when desk workers start to soften. Joel was built by that work. His hands were the hands of someone who fixed things, lifted things, put things together from raw materials. There was a practicality to him that ran all the way down, a sense that problems existed to be solved, and that the solution was usually something physical and immediate and within reach. He kept a revolver locked in a safe box in his home office. He owned a pickup truck. On his bedside table lay building plans and, beside them, a copy of a book about starting your own business. Because Joel had ambitions beyond the job site. He wanted his own contracting company eventually. He had thought it through. He was the kind of man who thinks things through quietly, alone, without announcing that he is doing so. There was a treadmill in his bedroom. That detail, small as it is, matters. A man raising a daughter alone on a contractor's wages, working long hours with his brother, still finding time to put in the cardio. That is a man who has decided, on some level, that he owes it to his daughter to stay capable, to stay strong, to remain the person between her and whatever the world might produce. He did not think of it in those terms, probably. He just ran. The house itself was a 2-story, single-family home in Travis County, somewhere along Texas State Highway 71. Not large, not decorated with any particular care, but lived in, genuinely, with the evidence of their life together, scattered through every room. Photographs on the walls, Joel and Sarah at a carnival with Tommy, the three of them caught mid-laugh at something, another from what appeared to be a cruise, both of them squinting in salt air and sunshine, several from Sarah's soccer matches, her small figure in team colours, Joel somewhere in the frame looking at her the way fathers do when they think nobody is looking at them. Sarah played for a youth team called the Defenders. She wore the number 14 on her jersey. She had a skateboard leaning against the wall of her bedroom, a poster of a rock band called The Bash on the wall above it, and the particular kind of organized independence that children develop when they have been raised by a parent who loves them completely, but also works long hours and trusts them to handle themselves. She was not neglected, not even close. She was simply a child who had grown up understanding that her father was doing his best and who had responded to that understanding by becoming, at 12 years old, remarkably capable and quietly watchful of him in return. She noticed things about Joel that Joel did not notice about himself. She knew, for instance, that he had broken his watch months before his 32nd birthday, a detail he had barely registered. She tucked the knowledge away, saved her money, or rather, she slipped some of his money from his jacket on the morning she was dropped at school, the kind of small domestic theft that is really an act of love, and had the watch repaired in secret. She intended to give it to him as a birthday gift. Sarah also had a deep and genuine love of museums, not the gift shop and move-on kind of love, but actual sustained interest in old things, in objects that had survived long enough to need explaining. She made Joel take her to every museum in Texas. He went, every one of them. It is easy to imagine him at those places, this large, quiet, slightly weathered man standing in front of exhibits about things that had nothing to do with construction or survival, watching his daughter read plaques with focused attention, asking questions the docents were surprised to hear from a 12-year-old. He would have stood back a little. He would have let her lead. He would have been paying more attention to her than to whatever was in the glass case. That is who Joel Miller was before. Not a hero, not a survivor, not a figure of moral complexity to be debated in forums and late-night conversations. A carpenter from Texas, raising his daughter and his brother on the same quiet determination, playing guitar when the house was still, running on a treadmill in the bedroom before the day started, making plans for a business he would never get to open. He was someone's father. That was the primary fact of him. Everything else, the smuggling, the violence, the decision at the hospital, the man the apocalypse made, all of it grew from that root and cannot be understood without it. Neil Druckmann, who created Joel and spent years writing him, wanted the character's appearance to carry something specific. The visual language was aimed at what Druckmann called rural Americana, the look of a man defined by self-reliance and ingenuity, someone you would believe could survive on practical skill alone, who had never needed much beyond what his hands could build or fix. Troy Baker, the actor who brought Joel to life in the games through performance capture and voice, pushed the character in a direction Druckmann had not fully anticipated. The original conception leaned toward the stoic, quiet, cool under pressure, controlled. Baker made him more emotional, more porous, more human. Druckmann later said he felt that Baker had simply found the truth of the man more accurately than the initial pitch had allowed for. Baker's anchor, from the very first audition, was a single line on the character sheet. Few moral lines left to cross. He read that and understood immediately what the story was going to cost everyone involved. He has said that phrase became the foundation from which he built everything. Every scene, every choice of stillness over performance, every moment where Joel says nothing and means everything. It is, in 5 words, the biography of a man after catastrophe. Not a bad man, not a villain, a man who has been worn down to the place where the things that used to stop him simply no longer do. But that is life too. This is still life one. And life one was not about moral lines. It was about birthday cakes and museum trips, and a borrowed movie playing quietly on a television, while a 12-year-old fell asleep on the couch beside her father. And outside, the night was completely ordinary. The watch worked. Sarah had fixed it. Joel wore it. He did not know yet what it was going to mean. The last normal day of Joel Miller's life was the 26th of September, 2013, his 32nd birthday. He woke up to Sarah already in the kitchen, making breakfast. She hated that he hated pancakes and made them anyway, because she thought it was funny, and Tommy arriving with news of a construction contract that would have them working late. Joel promised Sarah he would be home by 9 o'clock. He promised he would bring a cake. He was an hour late coming home. He had forgotten the cake. The forgetting, as it turned out, was not the worst thing that happened that night. Not even close. But in another universe, the universe where the world did not end that evening, it would have been the thing they teased him about for years. Remember that birthday, Dad? He would have groaned. She would have laughed. It would have become one of those small family stories that get told at dinner tables and feel like nothing until the person is gone, and suddenly they are everything. He arrived home. Sarah gave him the watch. He had no idea she had repaired it. He was tired from work and surprised and probably quietly moved in the way that people who do not express things easily get quietly moved by the gestures of people who love them. They sat together. They watched a movie she had borrowed from the neighbors, the Adler family next door. He put her to bed. Then Tommy called. He had been arrested. A bar fight. a crazed stranger, the usual chaos of a night gone sideways. Joel drove out to deal with it. He left Sarah sleeping in the house. She woke up alone. The Adler's door showed up at the miller's back door that night. Sarah went to check on them. She found something she did not have a word for yet, and Joel was already driving back. He came back to a neighborhood that was no longer a neighborhood. The drive home from bailing Tommy out should have taken 20 minutes. It took longer that night. The roads were strange. Traffic moving in patterns that did not make sense. Headlights clustered in places they had no reason to be at that hour. Joel did not know what was happening yet. Neither did Tommy. Neither did anyone. The information that would later be assembled into a coherent catastrophe. The cordyceps brain infection. The flour mill in Jakarta. The weeks of quiet spread before the critical mass. None of it existed yet as knowledge. It existed only as consequence, arriving faster than understanding could follow. He got home. He found Sarah. She was already frightened. She had seen the Adlers. She had seen what the Adlers had become. She was 12 years old, and she had walked into a neighbor's house alone at night and encountered something she had no framework for. And when Joel came through the door, she was holding herself together with the particular fierce steadiness of a child who has decided that falling apart is not an option right now. He would have seen that in her immediately. He would have recognized it, because it was something he had built into her, perhaps without meaning to. This capacity to keep functioning while something enormous was happening inside. Tommy was with him. They did not have long to think. The three of them got into Tommy's truck. What followed was the kind of night that rewrites a person permanently, not because of any single moment within it, but because of the unrelenting accumulation of moments, each one arriving before the previous one has been processed. The highway was blocked. The city was coming apart. People were moving in every direction at once. The specific chaos of a population that has received contradictory information and no clear instructions, and is responding to both with pure animal urgency. Tommy's truck collided with another vehicle in the confusion. They came to a stop in a place they had not intended to be. Sarah had broken her ankle in the crash. She could not run. Joel picked her up and carried her. That is the image at the center of everything. This large, practical, weathered man carrying his daughter through the end of the world on foot. The watch she had repaired for him still on his wrist, her arms around his neck, both of them moving toward Tommy and the river, and some version of safety that kept feeling like it was just a little further ahead. They were separated from Tommy briefly. They agreed to meet at the river. Joel moved through streets that were no longer safe, through the dark and the noise and the infected closing the distance behind them, carrying a child with a broken ankle who was not crying, who was holding on, who trusted him absolutely to get them somewhere the night could not follow. They reached the river. A soldier was waiting. Joel spoke to him. He explained that neither of them was infected. He was calm about it, or as calm as a man can be while carrying his injured daughter at the edge of a collapsing city. He believed in that moment that the soldier was the institution, that the soldier represented the apparatus of a society that, however imperfect, had rules about what you did with unarmed civilians. The soldier received a radio order. He opened fire. The shot caught Sarah. Joel threw himself sideways, trying to shield her, and they went down together. The soldier approached to finish it. Tommy arrived in time, arrived running, arrived shooting, and the soldier fell, and Joel looked down. She had been shot in the abdomen. The wound was bad. She was bleeding in the way that wounds bleed when there is nothing to be done about it quickly enough, and Joel knew, in the immediate, wordless, physical way that people know things their minds have not yet agreed to accept. He knew. He held her. He pressed his hand to the wound, the way you press your hand to things you cannot stop. She clasped him. She was still holding on. She was 12 years old, and she had fixed his broken watch as a birthday surprise and taken him to every museum in Texas and worn the number 14 on her soccer jersey. And she was still holding on. She died in his arms in the early hours of September 27th, 2013, on the ground near a river, somewhere outside Austin, Texas. Sarah Miller, 12 years old, daughter of Joel, niece of Tommy, the girl who noticed the things her father did not notice about himself, died in her father's arms while he held her and could not stop it. Tommy was nearby. Tommy saw it. There is nothing useful to say about what that moment looked like from the outside, and there is certainly nothing useful to say about what it felt like from where Joel was, kneeling on the ground, holding his daughter, the watch she had given him ticking against her hair. He had forgotten the birthday cake. That is the thought that lodges in the mind and refuses to move, in the way that grief often fixates on the smallest and most irrelevant detail as a means of avoiding the larger one. He had forgotten the cake. She had still given him the watch. She had still sat beside him on the couch and watched a movie and fallen asleep and been, in every possible way, his daughter, fully, ordinarily, completely his daughter, for the last time. The world was ending around them. Joel did not notice the world. He noticed her. There is a detail that belongs here, quiet and almost unbearably specific. The watch she gave him, the one she had secretly repaired using money taken from his jacket, broke again that night. In the chaos and the fall and everything that followed, the watch was damaged. It stopped working. Joel kept it anyway. He kept it for the next 25 years, broken, on his wrist or in his pocket, through everything that came after. He never had it repaired again. He kept the broken thing because she had touched it, because her hands had held it, had brought it to someone who fixed it, had given it back to him on the last ordinary night of his life. The watch was not a timepiece anymore after September 27th. It was the last object she had handled with love, in a world that was about to strip him of everything. It was the one thing he did not let go. This matters later. This matters at the very end, but we are not there yet. The immediate aftermath of the outbreak is one of the least documented periods of Joel's life, not because nothing happened, but because he never spoke of it. What is known comes from fragments, implications in dialogue, Tommy's testimony at certain moments in the years that followed, and one particular conversation in Pittsburgh, years later, in which Joel implies that he or someone he knew had seriously considered whether surviving was worth continuing to attempt. He and Tommy found themselves in a medical triage clinic in the days after the outbreak. The world was still collapsing. FEDRA, the Federal Disaster Response Agency, was beginning to assert the kind of emergency authority that eventually hardened into military occupation of quarantine zones. People were being processed, scanned, sorted. Joel was in that clinic, watching the world he had known fold in on itself. And he was also in that clinic, without his daughter. He found a gun. He attempted to use it on himself. He flinched. The wound was not fatal. It left a scar. It damaged his hearing permanently in one ear. That slight hollowness on the left side that stayed with him for the rest of his life. A body carrying the record of a moment when the body decided to keep going, even when the mind had not yet agreed to. Whether this was courage or simply reflex or something, biology does without consulting the person it belongs to is not a question anyone can answer cleanly. What is clear is that Joel Miller stood at the edge of that decision. took a step toward it, and came back. Not because he found a reason, not yet, simply because the gun did not do what it was supposed to do, and something in him, something below language and intention, chose the next breath instead. Tommy was there. Tommy had always been there. The two of them, who had kept each other standing since childhood, in the absence of parents who could do it for them, were still keeping each other standing now at the absolute worst moment either of them had ever faced or would face again. For a while, that was enough. Barely, but enough. They moved. Survivors move. The alternative is to stop, and Joel had already tried stopping, and it had not worked. So he moved instead. He and Tommy joined a traveling group, the kind of loose, desperate coalition that formed in the early years of the outbreak, when the quarantine zones were not yet fully established, and people were still trying to navigate towards somewhere safer, without knowing where safer was. In that group, they met a woman named Tess. She was from Rockford, Illinois. She had the same quality Joel had, a refusal to perform survival, a directness about what the world required of people now and what it did not, a clear-eyed understanding that kindness had not stopped being valuable, but that it needed to be rationed and aimed. She and Joel recognized something in each other immediately, the way people recognize their own survival style in someone else. What they did in those early years, Joel and Tommy and Tess, is one of the subjects Joel refused his entire life to discuss. The implication, in Tommy's dam in Pittsburgh, in the careful absences of Joel's own storytelling, is that they did terrible things, not infected things, not apocalypse monster things, human things, the things humans do when the systems that usually prevent them have collapsed, and there is nothing between a person and their survival except their own willingness to act. They are believed to have operated, for a period, as hunters. Hunters, in the world of the outbreak, were people who preyed on travelers, outsiders passing through territories claimed by organized survivor groups would be ambushed, stripped of their supplies, frequently killed. It was not random cruelty. It was a particular kind of economic logic applied to a world where resources were scarce enough that someone else having them felt like a direct threat to your own continuation. Joel has never confirmed this. He has never denied it either. He simply stopped the conversation every time it came close. In Pittsburgh, years later, when he and Ellie encountered hunters operating exactly as he and Tommy once had, there was something in his recognition of the system, the Humvee, the word they used for outsiders, the practiced efficiency of the ambush that went beyond mere observation. He knew it from the inside. That knowledge is in his body, in the way he moved through that city, in the way he never once expressed surprise at what the hunters were doing. Tommy eventually could not continue, but whatever they had done, and the weight of it is real, even if the specifics are never named, it broke something in Tommy that he could not rebuild by continuing to do it. He left. He found the Fireflies, the rebel militia movement that was framing survival as something more than mere continuation. He found ideology. He found eventually a woman named Maria and a community in Jackson, Wyoming that was building something rather than simply defending it. He left Joel behind. That departure, Tommy choosing to become someone different, someone with a moral framework that required him to stop doing what they had been doing, is one of the quiet devastations of Joel's life, because it left Joel alone with everything they had done together, without the one person who had shared the weight of it. Tommy got to walk away into a new version of himself. Joel stayed where he was. He found his way to Boston eventually. He found the quarantine zone, a militarized district ruled by Fedra, harsh and bureaucratic, and brutal in its own institutional way, but structured enough to allow a man like Joel to carve out a functional existence. He spent a period alone in Boston before Tess caught up with him. Or he found her. The timeline is not entirely clear. What is clear is that together they built something. Not a life exactly, not in any recognizable civilian sense, but a functional operation. They became smugglers. Black market trade in a quarantine zone meant weapons, medicine, ration cards, the currency of a world running on scarcity. Joel was the muscle. Tess was the mind. She had contacts across the Boston underworld that Joel would not have cultivated on his own. She called him Texas. It was an affectionate thing, the kind of nickname that means I see where you come from, and I've decided to keep you around anyway. Their relationship deepened into something that neither of them fully named. They were not sentimental people, and the world did not encourage sentimentality, but the depth was real. He cleaned her wounds with alcohol and rags without speaking. She told him things she did not tell other people. When he was injured, she found him a health kit. When she was threatened by a rival smuggler, she knew he would be there before she asked. They built a trade relationship with a survivalist named Bill, who had fortified an entire town in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and with a man named Frank, who lived with Bill. An awkward first dinner. Nobody trusted anybody. Tess and Frank got along better than Joel and Bill, which set the dynamic for the entire relationship. Bill owed Joel favors. The exact nature of those debts is left deliberately vague, and the arrangement held. Bill gathered supplies. Joel and Tess smuggled them into the quarantine zone. It worked. It was not happiness. Joel was not capable of happiness in those years in the way that he had once been. The capacity for it had not been destroyed exactly. It was more that it had been sealed off, placed somewhere he could not easily reach, because reaching for it required a kind of openness that the world and his own history had made too dangerous. He kept going. He stayed capable. He remained, in every practical sense, functional. He just kept the broken watch in his pocket and did not have it repaired. By the summer of 2033, 20 years had passed since the outbreak, 20 years since the river, 20 years since the night he forgot the birthday cake and came home to find the world already ending. Joel Miller was 52 years old, though he looked older, the way men who have been doing hard physical work in difficult conditions for decades tend to look older, and he was still in Boston, still smuggling with Tess, still carrying the weight of everything he refused to discuss. He was also, quietly, in contact with Tommy. Tommy had settled in Jackson. He had Maria. He had the commune. He had built something worth protecting, and was protecting it. The brothers corresponded. Radio contact, sparse messages, the minimal communication of two men who still fundamentally had each other's back, but had chosen very different paths toward the same destination of continued existence. Then Tommy went quiet. The messages stopped. Joel could not reach him. He began to plan a trip west. That was the summer Marlene found them. Marlene was the leader of the Boston Fireflies, the local cell of the rebel organization Tommy had once belonged to. She arrived wounded, surviving the aftermath of a raid that had decimated her local operation. She had something she needed moved. Not weapons this time. Not medicine. A girl. Her name was Ellie Williams. She was 14 years old. She was immune to the cordyceps infection, the only known case in the world. She had been bitten by an infected weeks earlier and had not turned. The Fireflies believed, Marlene believed, that Ellie's immunity could be the foundation of a cure. There was a Firefly medical team operating out of a hospital in Salt Lake City. If Ellie could be delivered to them, they believed they could end the infection. All of this is how the deal was framed to Joel and Tess. Joel's response, initially, was exactly what you would expect from a man who had spent 20 years reducing his exposure to anything that required caring about an outcome. He did not want the job. He did it anyway. He took the job because Tess wanted it. That is the simplest version of the truth. And Joel Miller was, beneath everything, a man who responded to simple truths more readily than complicated ones. Tess had reasons, practical reasons, the kind involving weapons caches and leverage and the ongoing mathematics of survival in a quarantine zone. And Joel trusted Tess's judgment in the way you trust the judgment of someone who has been right often enough and wrong seldom enough to have earned it. He did not trust the girl. She came at him with a knife the moment they met, which was not a recommendation. She was 14 and immune, and already had the particular quality of someone who has survived long enough in difficult circumstances to have developed both skill and attitude in roughly equal measure. Joel looked at her the way he had learned to look at everything that arrived in his life without an invitation, with flat assessment, no warmth offered, the transaction framed immediately as temporary. She was cargo. She would be delivered. He would be done with her. This was the plan. It survived approximately as long as most plans do. The first leg of the journey, getting Ellie out of the Boston quarantine zone and across the city to the Capitol building where a Firefly extraction team was waiting, went badly almost immediately. The Firefly team was not waiting. They were dead, killed by infected, their extraction point overrun. What was waiting was a building full of spores and darkness, and the first indication that this particular job was going to require more from Joel than he had budgeted. And Tess was bitten. In the Boston Museum, moving through the dark with a girl who was not turning despite her bite. Tess was bitten by a clicker, one of the infected in a more advanced stage, blind but attuned to sound in ways that made silence the only currency worth having in their vicinity. She kept it from Joel until they reached the Capitol building, until there was no longer any reason not to tell him. She showed him her bite. She showed him Ellie's. The comparison was unmistakable. Tess's wound was already swollen, already doing what the infection did. Ellie's had healed, clean skin, where there should have been the beginning of the end. Tess looked at Joel with the specificity of someone who has always known exactly what they want and is now asking for it directly for the last time. She asked him to finish the journey. She asked him to get Ellie to Tommy, who would know where the Firefly medical team was, who would get the girl to Salt Lake City. She asked him to do this not as a humanitarian gesture. Tess knew Joel better than to frame it that way, but as something owed to her, specifically by him. He was not going to argue with Tess at the end of Tess's life. A horde was coming. He could hear it, the clicking and the groaning that meant large numbers moving through the dark toward the sound and the light. Tess had already decided what she was going to do. She was going to buy them time. She was going to make herself useful to the last possible moment, which was so completely who she was that there was nothing to say about it. Joel took Ellie and left. Behind them, Tess used everything available: fuel, friction, the specific sacrifice of a woman who had decided that this was how the end of her life was going to look. And the building went up, and the horde was delayed, and Joel did not look back. He never looked back. Not at Tess, not at anything he left behind. Looking back was a thing he had stopped doing somewhere in the 20 years between the river outside Austin and the Capitol building in Boston. It cost too much. It was a luxury the world had stopped offering him, and he had stopped expecting. He had Ellie. He had a direction, west, toward Tommy. He had a job to do. He did not have grief. He did not have time for grief. He carried it instead, the way he carried everything, silently, without naming it, in the body rather than the mind, where it could not be examined or expressed, or given any of the air it would need to become something he was actually reckoning with. He kept moving. The journey across what remained of America is long enough and dark enough that a full accounting of it could sustain its own story. And perhaps, one quiet night, it will. For now, the shape of it is what matters. Joel and Ellie, moving westward through the ruins of interstate highways and collapsed cities, and the particular silence of places that once held millions of people and now held mostly weather. Bill's town came first. Lincoln, Massachusetts, 10 miles west of Boston, a community of one, just Bill, after Frank had gone, though they would not learn the full story of Frank's end until they arrived, and found Bill's letter and the quiet wreckage of what had been, against all of Bill's instincts and principles, a love story. Bill was alive. He did not want company. He owed Joel favors. The favors were called in. Bill lectured Joel about caring for someone. He said it with the particular bitterness of a man who had cared for someone and was still dealing with what that had cost him. Joel did not engage with the lecture. He let Bill talk because Bill was going to talk regardless, and because there were things Joel needed from Bill that required tolerating the commentary. Bill gave him a nail bomb and showed him how to make one. Bill gave them a car, a truck that needed a working battery, which required a small expedition through an infected high school to retrieve. Ellie, during all of this, was paying attention to everything. This is the part that crept up on Joel before he noticed it happening. She asked questions, not stupid questions, precise ones, the kind that suggested genuine curiosity about how the world worked and how it had worked before she was old enough to remember. She had a joke book. She would pull out the jokes when the weight of the road became too heavy, deploying them with timing that suggested she understood what the jokes were actually for. Not humor exactly, but the release valve that humor provides, the small rupture in tension that lets people keep going. Joel answered her questions about the world before the infection, in the careful way of someone who knows that some of those answers are going to land near things he does not want to think about. A movie poster for something called Dawn of the Wolf. He had seen it with Sarah around the time of the outbreak, though he did not tell Ellie that. He said he did not remember why he would have watched such a movie. This was a lie. The lie was about Sarah. Almost every lie Joel told in those months was, in some way, about Sarah. He did not speak Sarah's name to Ellie. Not yet. Not for a long time. They moved through Pittsburgh, which was not Pittsburgh anymore in any civic sense, but a territory held by hunters operating exactly as Joel had once operated, in exactly the same fashion, with exactly the same brutal efficiency. There was something in the way Joel moved through that city, in the way he recognized the systems and the patterns and the geography of an ambush. That was not the recognition of an outsider reading a situation. It was the recognition of someone reading their own old handwriting in someone else's notebook. He said very little about it. Ellie noticed. She was always noticing. In Pittsburgh, they found Sam and Henry, a young boy and his older brother, navigating the same city with fewer resources, and the particular desperation of someone who has taken on the protection of a smaller person and is finding it heavier than they expected. Joel recognized something in Henry that he would not have been able to name. They moved together for a while, the four of them, through the tunnels and the streets. It ended badly. It ended in the specific way that things ended in that world, quickly and without ceremony, and leaving behind the kind of wound that does not show on the outside. Sam was infected. Henry made his choice. Joel told Ellie not to bring it up again. He said that a lot. Don't bring it up. Tess, Sam, Henry. The names of the dead were sealed compartments that he kept shut by force of will, because he had discovered somewhere in the 20 years since Sarah that opening one compartment risked opening all of them, and he was not structurally capable of surviving all of them open at once. Ellie brought them up anyway. Not to be cruel. She was never cruel about it, and she was perceptive enough to understand what she was doing when she pushed against his closed doors. She did it because she was 14 and alone in the world, and the only person she had was this large, silent, complicated man who kept refusing to be a person in front of her, and she needed him to be a person more than she needed him to be a protector. She needed a father. She did not know that was what she needed. Joel did not know that was what he was becoming. They reached Wyoming eventually. Tommy's settlement, Jackson, a functioning community with electricity and horses and people who had built something worth defending. Joel had not seen his brother in years. The reunion was not warm in any conventional sense. These were not men who expressed things easily, but it was real. Tommy had kept a photograph of Joel and Sarah from their old life in Texas. He had gone back for it. He had carried it across the country and kept it because he thought Joel would want it. Joel looked at the photograph for a long moment. He gave it back. He could not keep it. The image of the two of them, before, whole, in the ordinary light of a world that still had birthday cakes and museum trips and soccer jerseys, was more than he could carry in physical form. He could carry the broken watch. He could carry the abstract weight of everything that had happened. He could not carry a piece of paper that showed him exactly who he had been before the weight arrived. Tommy took it back without comment. He understood. Tommy offered to take Ellie the rest of the way. He knew the route to Salt Lake City. He could get her to the Fireflies without Joel having to continue. And Joel, at that point, was looking for an exit. He had done his part. He had kept the cargo alive this far. He was ready to hand it off and be done with the job, and go back to being a man with no attachments and no hope, and the specific cold comfort of not caring about anything enough to lose it. Ellie had other thoughts. She found Joel at the stables. She confronted him, not angrily, but with the directness of someone who has decided that the thing they are afraid to say is less dangerous than the thing they are afraid to lose. She told him that he reminded her of someone she had lost, that she was not ready, that she needed him specifically, and not Tommy specifically because Joel was the one she had been through the Pittsburgh streets with, and the Boston dark with, and the everything in between with. Joel told her he was not her father. He said it the way people say things they believe to be true and are simultaneously less certain of than they sound. He went with her anyway. The winter chapter is the one nobody entirely recovers from. Joel was impaled on a rebar spike in an abandoned building somewhere in the deep cold of a Colorado winter, fell through a skylight, landed badly, the metal going through him in the particular way that the body registers before the mind does, that hollow shock of something being very wrong before the pain arrives to confirm it. He pulled himself off the rebar. This is the kind of detail that tells you everything about the gap between what the body is capable of when survival is the only option, and what the body should reasonably be asked to do. And Ellie got him moving, got him to shelter, kept him alive through weeks of recovery that required her to go out into the world alone and do things she had not been asked to do before. She killed for him. She hunted for him. She sat beside him when he was delirious with fever and spoke to him and kept speaking because stopping felt like admitting something she was not ready to admit. She kept him warm. She kept him breathing. She became, in those weeks, not the cargo, but the guardian, the one between the helpless person and whatever the world was producing outside the shelter door. When Joel came back to himself, fully back, not just conscious, but present, Ellie was already different. Not harder exactly, more settled, more certain of something that had been uncertain before. He called her baby girl. It was not a deliberate choice. It came out of the fever, or out of the particular vulnerability of a man who has been kept alive by someone smaller than him, and is not sure yet how to hold that. He said it, and then he was awake enough to be aware that he had said it. And there was a moment where the whole weight of it, what she was to him now, what she had become across the months of this journey, was visible in his face for anyone looking. She was looking. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She had understood what he was, to her, long before he understood what she was to him. Children who need fathers usually do. They moved on. They always moved on. West and south, through the last of winter towards Salt Lake City, toward the Fireflies, toward the end of the job, which is what Joel was still calling it in his own mind. Probably, even then, the job, the cargo, the mission. He was lying to himself. He had been lying to himself for months. The lie was this, that Ellie was a task to be completed, a thing to be delivered, a means by which he would discharge the debt he owed Tess, and then return to the simplified existence he had maintained since Boston. The truth was simpler and more devastating. He loved her. He had not planned to. He had explicitly, deliberately, with full awareness of what he was doing, avoided doing exactly this. He had watched Bill lecture him about caring for someone, and thought privately that Bill's cautionary tale was unnecessary because he was not going to make that mistake. He had told Ellie at the stables that he was not her father, and meant it as a statement of protective distance rather than an unkindness. He had carried the broken watch, and not a photograph of Sarah, because photographs were too real, too specific, too present. And he had told himself that this careful management of his own emotional exposure was working. It had not been working. It had not been working since approximately Pittsburgh. He loved her the way he had loved Sarah, not identically, not as a replacement, because grief does not work that way. And Joel understood grief better than almost anything else by this point in his life. He loved her as herself, as this specific, impossible 14-year-old with a joke book and a talent for noticing things and a particular quality of needing him that he had not felt needed by anything in 20 years. She had walked back into the part of him that had been sealed since the river outside Austin without asking permission and set up residence there. This is the context for everything that comes next. Without this context, what Joel did at St. Mary's Hospital is simply violence. With it, it is the most human thing in the story. They reached Salt Lake City in the spring. The Firefly Hospital, St. Mary's, a medical facility that the Firefly organization had repurposed as their base of operations for the research into Ellie's immunity, was quiet when they approached. Too quiet. Joel moved through it with the practiced wariness of a man who has survived long enough to understand that the absence of threat is sometimes itself the threat. Marlene met them. She told Joel that the surgery to extract the information from Ellie's immunity, the procedure the Firefly surgeon, Dr. Jerry Anderson, had designed, would be fatal. The process required operating on the part of Ellie's brain where the cordyceps mutation had taken root. The mutation that made her immune was inseparable from the tissue that made her herself. You could not have one without destroying the other. Ellie did not know this. She was already under general anesthesia in the operating room. Nobody had told her. Nobody had asked her. Joel asked if there was any other way. There was not, Marlene said. This was the only way. He was escorted out at gunpoint. A Firefly soldier walked him through the hospital corridors, away from the operating theatre, away from Ellie, toward an exit that would have put him back outside in the spring air, with nothing left to do, and nowhere particular to go, and a debt to Tess that would have been discharged. He stopped walking. He turned around. What followed was not something Joel has ever been asked to justify in the story, because the story did not afford him the opportunity, and because the people he killed were in no position afterward to ask. He fought his way back through the hospital. Guards, soldiers, the building's entire defensive capacity, moving with the kind of focused, efficient violence that 20 years of survival in the worst conditions the post-apocalyptic world had produced had made him capable of. He was 52 years old. He moved like a man who has nothing left to protect except the one thing he is currently protecting. He reached the operating room. He took Ellie off the table. He carried her out of the building, unconscious, breathing, alive. In his arms, the same arms that had held Sarah on the ground outside Austin 20 years earlier. The same posture, the same weight. This time, the outcome was different. This time, he was going to make the outcome different, regardless of what it cost anyone else. In the parking garage, Marlene caught up with them. She made her case. She told him what he already knew, that Ellie would agree to this, that Ellie would choose it, that taking her away was taking the choice from her. She was not wrong. She was not wrong about any of it, which is the thing that makes this moment so difficult to look at directly for too long. Joel shot Marlene. He did not wait to finish the conversation. He shot her, and he kept walking. He lied to Ellie when she woke up. He told her there were dozens of immune people. He told her the Fireflies had run tests and determined that a vaccine was not possible. He told her raiders had attacked the hospital. He told her every lie that would seal the door on the question of what had happened at St. Mary's and prevent it from ever being opened again. He swore to her, when she asked him to swear, that everything he had told her was true. He drove them away from Salt Lake City and toward Wyoming and toward Tommy and toward whatever came next. Life won. The hidden man, the Texas carpenter, the devoted single father, had ended 20 years before on the ground near a river in Austin. Life too, the public survivor, the smuggler, the man with few moral lines left to cross, was ending now on a highway in Utah with an unconscious girl in the passenger seat and a broken watch on his wrist. Life 3 was beginning. He did not know yet what it was going to cost him to live it. Jackson, Wyoming sits in a valley ringed by mountains that do not care about human history. They were there before the outbreak. They are there after it. They will be there long after the last person who remembers the outbreak is gone. There is something in the scale of that landscape, the peaks, the cold, the sky in winter that goes on past the point where looking at it is comfortable, that either breaks people or steadies them. It tends to break the ones who arrived running from something. It tends to steady the ones who arrived willing, finally, to stop. Joel arrived running. He arrived with a lie in his mouth and an unconscious girl in his passenger seat and the specific hollowness of a man who has just done something enormous and is not yet sure how to hold the weight of it. He arrived at Tommy's settlement, the commune that Maria and Tommy had built into something genuinely functional, with electricity from a repaired hydroelectric dam and horses and crops, and the organized activity of people who have decided to build rather than simply survive. He arrived, and Tommy took Ellie, and Joel stood in the valley, surrounded by mountains, and breathed. There is no record of what he felt in those first days. Joel was not a man who recorded his feelings, not in diaries, not in conversations, not in the careful unburdening that therapists and counselors facilitate. He processed things internally, in the silence that he had cultivated across 20 years of refusing to speak about anything that cost him something to name. What we know is that he stayed. He had no particular reason to stay. The job was done, the cargo delivered, the debt to Tess discharged in the currency Tess had specified. But he stayed anyway. The staying was itself an answer to a question he had been carrying since the suicide attempt in the triage clinic. He had found, again, something to fight for. He did not announce this. He would not have used those words. He simply began to build a life in Jackson, the way he had always built things. Practically, quietly, with his hands and his attention, without ceremony or declaration. He became part of Tommy and Maria's community. He took on work, construction, which was what he knew, the organizing of physical material into functional structures, the satisfaction of a thing that holds together because you made it hold together. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. He and Ellie lived within the settlement. The first year was careful. Ellie knew something had happened at the hospital in Salt Lake City. She was not an unintelligent person, and the gaps in Joel's story were large enough and shaped in ways specific enough that they declared themselves even without being pointed to. She could feel the weight of the thing he was not telling her, but she did not yet know the specific shape of it, and Joel's lie was constructed solidly enough to hold against direct questioning. And she was 14, and she was tired, and she was, underneath all of it, happy enough in Jackson to let the unanswered questions sit for a while. They settled into something that resembled, from the outside, a family. Not a perfect one, not an uncomplicated one. Joel was not capable of uncomplicated domesticity. He had too much in him that the domestic life of Jackson had no container for. But something real, something that looked, on an ordinary Tuesday morning with the snow coming down outside, and Ellie doing whatever Ellie was doing, and the smell of coffee if they had coffee, and the sound of the settlement going about its business, like a version of the life he had lost, and was quietly, very slowly, attempting to reconstruct from different materials. He attended therapy sessions with a woman named Gail. This is worth pausing on. Joel Miller, the man who told Ellie not to bring it up, who had sealed every name of every dead person into compartments he controlled by force of will, who had spent 20 years moving through grief, as if grief were a physical obstacle to be navigated around rather than a condition to be inhabited, chose, in Jackson, to sit in a room with a therapist and attempt, in his way, to speak. He was not good at it. The available evidence suggests he was quite bad at it in the specific way that people who have spent decades refusing to examine themselves are bad at it, bringing the same silences and deflections to the therapy room that he brought to every other room, trying to apply the same management strategies to feelings that management strategies are not designed for. But he went. He kept going. He made the choice, repeatedly, to go back to that room and try again. That is the detail about the Jackson years that tells you who Joel was trying to become. Not the man who massacred the Firefly hospital. That man existed and cannot be unmade. But a man who looked at himself at 53, 54, and decided that the wreckage he had made of his own interior life deserved some attention. A man who understood, on some level, that what he had done at St. Mary's was not only about saving Ellie, that it was also about the river outside Austin, and the triage clinic, and the sealed compartments, and the broken watch, and 20 years of moving without stopping. He was trying to stop. Here, in Jackson, in the valley with the mountains that did not care about human history. He was not entirely succeeding, but he was trying. Ellie's 15th birthday arrived in the first winter of their Jackson life. Joel had been thinking about it for weeks, without quite admitting to himself that he was thinking about it. He was a man who had forgotten a birthday cake once, 20 years ago, in a way that had become permanently attached to everything that followed it. Not rationally, not through any actual chain of causation, but in the way the mind attaches culpability to the nearest available thing, when the real thing is too large to look at directly. He did not forget birthdays anymore. He found a guitar, not bought. There was no buying things in Jackson in the conventional sense. Found, acquired, sourced through the particular barter economy of a post-apocalyptic settlement where almost everything worth having had once belonged to someone else and survived by being where it needed to be when someone needed it. He found a guitar and he spent time with it before giving it to her. Not playing it exactly, or not only playing it, but working on it. He engraved a moth on the body of the instrument. The moth was from her drawings. She drew moths. He had been paying attention. On the morning of her birthday, he gave it to her. Ellie held it the way you hold something you did not expect to love immediately, and already love immediately. She turned it over. She found the moth. She looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has been seen accurately by another person and is not quite sure what to do with the fact of being seen. She asked him to play something. He was reluctant. He was always reluctant about the guitar. It connected to the boy in Texas who had dreamed of being a singer, and that boy was a long way away now, and reaching back to him required a kind of openness that Joel did not find easy. But Ellie was asking, and she had just found the moth on the guitar, and he had come this far. He played Pearl Jam's Future Days. The song had been released in October of 2013 on an album called Lightning Bolt. Technically, in the show's universe, it should not have existed, the outbreak having occurred a decade before the record was ever made. The story finds a way around this because the story needed to. Some things are more true than timelines. Some songs belong to certain moments so completely that the mathematics of when they were written becomes irrelevant. Eddie Vedder wrote Future Days after losing a close friend. He wrote it about grief and about the future that does not arrive for the people you lose, and about the way love persists in the present tense, even when its object is gone. The lyrics circle around a central terror, the terror of losing someone so completely that you would lose yourself along with them. If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. The song knows that some people are not separate from you in any meaningful way, that losing them is not subtraction, but division. You do not have less of yourself afterward. You have a different kind of nothing. Joel sat with Ellie's guitar and sang that song to her on her 15th birthday in Jackson, Wyoming. He started out embarrassed. You can hear it in the telling, the slight stiffness, the self-consciousness of a man who has not sung in front of anyone for a very long time, who is aware that vulnerability in this particular form is not something he is practiced at, but he grew comfortable. The way you grow comfortable with something that is true, not immediately, not all at once, but incrementally, as the thing you are doing reminds you that it was always yours to do. Ellie listened. She did not make jokes. She did not reach for the joke book. She just listened. The song is about loss. The song is about the person you cannot afford to lose. The song is about doing everything, all of it, without limit or condition, to keep that person in the world. Joel Miller, who had already done everything and paid every cost and crossed every line and told every lie to keep Ellie Williams alive, sat in a room in Jackson and sang her a song that was, in the plainest possible terms, about exactly that. He probably did not think of it that way in the moment. He was just playing the guitar for her birthday. He was just doing the thing she asked him to do. He was just being, for once, in this valley, with these mountains outside the window, the man he had wanted to be before everything. But the song said it. The song said all of it, and Ellie heard every word. She got a vinyl copy of Pearl Jam's debut album, 10, for her room after that. A detail that would have made Joel smile in the quiet way he smiled at things. The evidence that she had followed the thread he had given her, that music had taken root in her, the way it had once taken root in him. She put a Kurt Cobain poster outside her bedroom door, a Radiohead lyric, the particular musical geography of a teenager in a post-apocalyptic settlement building herself a cultural identity from the salvaged pieces of a world she had never actually lived in. Joel gave her that. He gave her the guitar and the moth and Future Days and all the music that came after it. It was one of the best things he ever did, and it sits right next to one of the worst things he ever did, inseparably, because that is how Joel Miller's story works. The tenderness and the violence occupying the same space, the love and the devastation woven together so completely that you cannot pull one thread without disturbing the other. The fracture came slowly. Ellie was not a person who let things go. This was one of her defining qualities, the tenacity, the refusal to accept incomplete information, the understanding that a question left unanswered is not the same as a question resolved. She was also, as she grew from 14 to 15 to 16 to 17, becoming more capable of the kind of sustained, independent investigation that her earlier dependence on Joel had not permitted. She was talking to people in Jackson. She was listening. She was putting things together. She knew something was wrong with the story. She did not know yet what the right story was, but she knew the shape of the wrong one, the places where it did not hold, the gaps that Joel's lie had not quite sealed, the specific quality of his silence when certain subjects arose. She had been raised, in a sense, by his silences. She knew them better than almost anyone. The distance between them grew by degrees, not a rupture, not an explosion, not a single confrontation that broke everything at once, just the slow, quiet withdrawal of someone who is no longer sure that the person they trusted is the person she thought she was trusting. She spent more time with Dina, her closest friend in Jackson. She spent less time looking for Joel in the evenings. She stopped bringing him the small things, observations about the day, jokes that had landed or not landed, the minor domestic currency of people who are actually sharing a life. Joel noticed. He was always noticing things about her, even when he appeared not to be. He noticed the distance, and he understood, with the part of him that had always understood things he could not say, what was causing it. He did not tell her the truth. He could not tell her the truth. He had told himself, in the years since Salt Lake City, that the lie was protective, that what Ellie did not know could not hurt her, that the weight of the knowledge would only damage her, that he had made the choice, and he would carry it, and she would be spared the carrying. This was not entirely dishonest. He did believe this, genuinely, in the way that people believe things that happen to also serve their own interests. But the other part of it, the part he was less willing to examine, was simpler. He was afraid of what she would do with the truth. He was afraid of what she would feel. He was afraid of losing her, which is the supreme irony of his entire story, that the fear of losing her was what drove him to the hospital, and the fear of losing her was what made him keep the lie, and the lie was exactly what was costing him her, slowly, in the way that slow things cost you before you notice the account is empty. He went to therapy with Gail. He talked around it. He talked about other things, the dark years, the Hunter period that he had never spoken of to anyone, the suicide attempt, the weight of the dead he refused to name. He was making progress on the things that were easier to approach. The hospital was different. The hospital required him to say, in language, to another person, that he had decided Ellie's life was worth more than the rest of the world, and then to hold that sentence in the room with another person's response to it. He was not ready for that sentence. He kept going to therapy anyway. The going mattered, even when the going did not go where it needed to. He worked construction. He patrolled the settlement perimeter. He sat with Tommy sometimes and did not say much and did not need to. He was learning, slowly, imperfectly, against the grain of everything his last 25 years had made of him, to be in a peace without bracing for it to be taken from him. He was learning to live in Jackson, the way you learn to sleep in an unfamiliar bed, by staying in it long enough that it starts to feel like yours. Dina told him once, or he overheard it, or it reached him through the settlement's small-town information flow, that Ellie was angry with him, not the generalized anger of a teenager with a difficult parental figure, something specific and sustained, something that had a cause. He pushed it down. He kept going. He turned 56 in Jackson on September 26th, in a valley surrounded by mountains that did not care about human history, wearing a broken watch on his wrist and carrying everything else in the same place he had always carried it. He attended the New Year's celebration. He split wood. He fixed the gas line in the new house they were building, a detail that placed him, on the last morning of his final chapter, in a specific room with a specific problem to solve, doing what he had always done, fixing things with his hands, making structures hold that might otherwise collapse. The price of the lie was named eventually, not to Gail, not to Tommy, to Ellie, in a conversation that had been building for 4 years and arrived the way pressure always arrives when it has nowhere else to go, all at once, in the open, undeniable. She had found out the truth. The exact mechanism by which she found it is less important than the fact of it, that the story Joel had constructed, which had been solid enough to hold against casual questioning, was not solid enough to hold against a determined and intelligent person who had spent 4 years looking at its seams. The world of Jackson was small. People talked. Firefly survivors had their own accounts. The contradictions accumulated until the structure gave. She confronted him. The conversation is among the most painful in the entire story, not because of its volume. It is not a shouting scene. It is not performed at the pitch of melodrama, but because of what both of them understand about what is being said. Ellie told Joel that if she had been given the chance to sacrifice herself, her life would have mattered, that the cure would have been her meaning, that he had taken her meaning from her in the same moment he saved her life, and she was not sure she could forgive that. She said it clearly. She said it to his face. Joel listened. He listened the way he had listened to everything that cost him something, without flinching, without performance, with the specific quality of attention that means the words are landing in exactly the place they were aimed. He told her he would do it again, 1,000 times, because he loved her. He was not offering this as a defense. He was not asking her to understand or to forgive. He was stating a fact about himself, that he had finally, after years of therapy and silence and the slow work of Jackson, arrived at the capacity to state plainly, he loved her. The hospital was the expression of that love at its most absolute and its most destructive simultaneously. He knew both things were true. He was not trying to resolve the contradiction. He was just telling her which side of it he stood on. She said, okay, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, okay. The word that means I have heard you, and I know where you stand, and I need time to decide where I stand in relation to it. the word that closes a conversation without closing the question the conversation was about. Joel followed her out at a distance. She walked ahead. He walked behind. The mountains were there. The valley was there. The broken watch was on his wrist. This is the last extended conversation they had. The story does not give them another one. The distance between them after this conversation is not smaller than it was before. If anything, the naming of the thing has made it more real, more present, more specifically shaped. But something has also been discharged. The lie is no longer between them. What is between them now is the truth, which is harder to carry, and also, in some ways, less heavy than the pretending. They did not repair things. They did not have time, but they knew, both of them, by the end of that conversation, what they were to each other. Father and daughter, not by biology, not by any official arrangement, but by the specific weight of what had passed between them across 5 years, and a continent, and the end of the world, by the guitar with the moth on it, by future days played in a room in Wyoming while the snow came down, by the broken watch that had started with Sarah's hands and would end, as it turned out, with Tommy's. January 1st, 2029. Joel Miller woke up in Jackson, Wyoming, in the settlement he had been part of for 5 years, and went to work. There was a report of infected activity. 30 or so stopped at the copper mine route on the patrol perimeter. Standard enough in the context of Jackson's ongoing management of the landscape around the settlement. Joel volunteered to go out. He wanted to go with Ellie. She was sleeping, which meant he went with Dina instead. Isabella Mercedes Dina in the television version of the story, though the dynamic is consistent across both. The young woman who was close to Ellie, and who had developed, in the way of Jackson's small community, a friendly working relationship with Joel. They rode out. The copper mine was not quiet when they arrived. Something had happened. The infected count was wrong. The situation was larger than the report had indicated, and among the chaos, there was a woman, alone, cornered, being overwhelmed by a runner that she had not been able to put down before it got too close. Joel shot it. He pulled her back. He checked her for bites. She was clean, and he looked at her, this stranger in the Wyoming cold, and made the decision that people like Joel make without thinking, because the decision is encoded somewhere deep in who they are below the level of the calculating survival mind. He brought her with them. Her name was Abby Anderson. She was 24 years old. She was the daughter of Dr. Jerry Anderson, the Firefly head surgeon whom Joel had killed at St. Mary's Hospital in Salt Lake City in the spring of 2034. She had been looking for Joel Miller for 5 years. She had crossed the country to find him. She had lost people she loved on the way. She had built herself, in the interim, into someone physically and operationally capable of doing what she had come to do, which was to find the man who had walked into her father's operating room and made an orphan of her, and make him understand, in the most permanent terms available, what that had felt like. She had found him. He did not know this yet. He looked at her and saw a survivor in trouble, which was the category of person he had been trained by every significant relationship of his life to help. Tess would have helped. Ellie would have helped. He helped. He brought her to the lodge where her friends were waiting. Tommy was with them now. The 4 of them, Abby and Joel, and Tommy and Dina, moving through the cold toward a building full of people Joel did not know. Halfway there, the horde turned away, turned toward Jackson, toward the settlement, toward everyone Joel cared about, and he said he had to go back. He had to get back to the settlement. He could not leave them with a horde coming. Abby told him her friends at the lodge were armed and would help him fight. He believed her. He went with her. He was trying to get back to the people he loved by going the fastest route available, which meant going through the lodge, which meant going where she was leading him. He walked in. Tommy was knocked unconscious. Abby's companions, her group from Seattle, the WLF, the organization she had joined after Salt Lake City, held Dina, and Abby retrieved a golf club from a corner of the lodge and stood in front of Joel Miller and looked at him. She told him who she was. She told him whose daughter she was. She told him how many people he had killed in that hospital. She told him that her father had been trying to save the world, and that Joel had decided one girl was worth more than the world, and that she had been 17 years old when that decision was made on her behalf, without her consent, the same age Ellie had been, both of them children who had the most important choice of their era made for them by adults who loved someone enough to take the choice away. Joel told her to get it over with. She shot his kneecap. She said he did not get to rush this. She called him a stupid old man. She beat him with her bare hands. She beat him with the golf club. She talked and beat him, and the room was full of the sound of it, and the snow was outside the windows, and somewhere across the valley, the settlement was dealing with the horde, and Ellie was waking up, and the radio was not answering, and Jesse was going to go looking. Ellie arrived. She came through the door, and she saw him, and she tried to get to him, and they held her. She begged. She said please. She said his name. She tried everything a person tries when they are watching something they cannot stop. Joel moved. In his last moments, he heard her. He moved. Slightly. Not much. Just enough. He was trying to get to her. He was trying, as he had always tried, to get to the person he was supposed to protect, to put himself between them and whatever the night was producing. He could not. Abby took the golf club, by now broken, the shaft sharpened by the violence of what it had been used for, and drove it into Joel's neck. He died. He died on January 1st, in a ski lodge in Wyoming, 5 years after arriving in the valley, with a lie in his mouth and a broken watch on his wrist. He died having built something in Jackson that was real, having sat in a therapist's office and tried, having played Future Days on a birthday and meant every word of it, having told the truth, finally, when the truth was asked of him directly. He died the way Neil Druckmann had always intended for him to die, not heroically, not in a blaze of the kind of glory that would have given the audience permission to feel proud rather than gutted. Gross, unceremonious, humiliating. The death of a man whose death is meant to make you angry, not at Abby exactly, but at the machine, at the cycle, at the chain of grief that produces people like Abby, from people like Joel, at the world that creates situations where the only options available are the wrong ones. Ellie held his hand when it was over. They took his body back to Jackson on horseback. Ellie and Dina and Jesse, dragging him home the way he had always dragged everything worth keeping back from wherever it had nearly been lost. Tommy cleaned his body that night among the dead, in the specific language of the things that matter, because they are specific. Tommy noticed what Joel was still wearing. The broken watch, Sarah's watch, the one she had repaired with stolen money and given him on the last ordinary night of his life, the one that had shattered in the fall near the river on the night she died, the one he had carried for 25 years without having it repaired, through Boston and the dark years and the journey and the hospital and Jackson and the guitar birthday and the conversation about truth and January 1st And all of it, still on his wrist, still broken, still his. There is a debate that has been running since June of 2013. It began the moment the first players reached the end of The Last of Us and sat with what they had just done. Because in the game you do it. You are Joel. Your hands on the controller are the hands that fought through St. Mary's Hospital. Your thumbs moved the thumbstick that carried Ellie out of the operating theatre, and you made the choice not as a spectator, but as a participant. The debate began in living rooms and on forums and in the particular late-night conversations that happen between people who have just experienced something that refuses to resolve itself cleanly, and it has not stopped since. Was Joel Miller a good man? It is, in the end, the only question his story asks. Everything else, the dates and the locations and the specific details of the journey and the watch and the guitar, all of it is the evidence submitted to the jury. The question itself is the verdict that the jury has been unable, across more than a decade and multiple generations of players and viewers, to reach. Neil Druckmann, who wrote Joel, and who has spent years being asked about him in interviews and on podcasts and at industry panels, has given the question more sustained and honest attention than almost any creator gives to the moral architecture of their own characters. In 2025, in a conversation on the Sacred Symbols podcast, he said the thing that everyone had been waiting for him to say for 11 years. The cure would have worked. The Fireflies had the knowledge and the resources. The surgery would have killed Ellie, and the result would have been a vaccine. Joel destroyed humanity's best chance at salvation because he could not allow the specific human who mattered most to him to be the cost of it. Druckmann said this, and then, in the same interview season, told IGN, "I believe Joel was right." These two statements exist simultaneously in the record. They do not cancel each other out. They are both true, which is the entire point, which is, in fact, the specific kind of truth that The Last of Us was built to deliver. Not a truth you can hold in one hand and call settled. A truth that requires both hands and still spills over the edges. Craig Mazin, who co-created the HBO adaptation with Druckmann, put it differently. He said he probably would have done what Joel did. He said he would like to think he would not have. He described this tension as the interesting push and pull, the thing that makes the ending provocative and generative rather than merely conclusive. He said, "It does not let you off the hook." That phrase, "does not let you off the hook," is the best description of what Joel Miller's story does to the people who encounter it. It refuses to give you a position from which you can watch safely. You have to stand somewhere in relation to what he did. You have to decide, for yourself, with the full weight of both things. The cure was real, and the love was real. Which side of that equation you can live on, what? And the answer turns out to be different for almost everyone, which means Joel Miller is doing exactly what the greatest fictional characters do. He is showing us something true about the range of what it means to be human, about the breadth of ways that people can look at the same facts and reach irreconcilable but equally defensible conclusions about what those facts mean. Troy Baker sat with the character for a long time before he understood what he was holding. The phrase on the audition character sheet, "few moral lines left to cross," gave him the foundation. But foundations are just the beginning. What Baker found as he worked with Druckmann and with Ashley Johnson and with the material itself was a character who was not designed to be liked or disliked, but to be understood. And understanding Joel required understanding grief in the specific way that grief operates on people who cannot express it. Not as sadness, which is visible and therefore manageable, but as armor, which protects the person wearing it at the cost of preventing anything from getting through in either direction. Baker pushed the character towards something more emotional than the initial pitch. The original conception, inspired by Josh Brolin's Llewellyn Moss in No Country for Old Men, was cooler, more contained. The stoic Texan archetype with its appealing surface of competence and restraint. Baker, as he inhabited the role, found that the stoic surface needed a visible interior for the character to do what the story needed him to do. Not visible in the sense of performed, not tears or speeches or the conventional signals of emotional depth, visible in the way that the effort of containing something reveals the something being contained. The prologue is where this is clearest. The first day of filming it, Joel and Sarah in the house, the ordinary morning, the last normal night. Druckmann watched the footage and felt it was not yet right. He brought Baker back. He explained what the scene needed. They shot it again, and this time it worked. And Baker later recognized what the difference had been. On the first take, he had been acting for an audience, performing the emotion in the way that acting is often described and taught. On the second take, he had simply been in the room with the girl who played his daughter, in the house, in the night, and let the scene be what it was. He was not trying to make anyone feel anything. He was just there. That is the technical description of what Joel Miller is as a character. An instruction to stop trying to make anyone feel anything and just be there, in the room, with the weight of the thing. Pedro Pascal, who brought Joel to a vastly larger audience through the HBO adaptation, came to the character from a different angle. He was not a gamer. He had watched his nephew play the beginning of the first game because he lacked the skill to manage the controller himself. He found Joel impressive in the way you find something impressive when you encounter it without the familiarity that dulls impressiveness. He chose not to imitate Baker's performance. He chose what he called a healthy distance, a space in which Joel could be himself through Pascal's own instrument, rather than through an imitation of Baker's. He based Joel's voice on his own upbringing in San Antonio, Texas, the Southern register, but pared back from the game's accent, brought closer to something ambient and lived in rather than performed. Pascal was American and Chilean, born in Santiago and raised partly in Texas, and he understood, from his own biography, from the experience of being a person whose origins are complicated and whose home has always been somewhere between places, the particular quality of a man who carries where he came from in his body without making it his identity. Baker, watching Pascal's performance, said he was glad Pascal had not mimicked him. He said Pascal brought a different inherent sensibility. He said it with the generosity of someone who understands that a character does not belong to any single performance of it, that Joel Miller, created by Druckmann, voiced by Baker, embodied by Pascal, existed before any of them, and will continue to exist after all of them, in the minds of the people who encountered him and found something in him that mattered to them. That is the other life Joel Miller is living. The one that is not in the canon, not in the game or the show or the law documents or the wiki pages. The life he lives in the people who met him. It is worth sitting with what the character actually cost to create, not the development budget or the production hours. Those are real, but they are not what this is about. What it cost in the specific currency of human creative courage. Druckmann made a character that the audience was going to love, and then, in the sequel, he killed that character in the second act in a way designed to produce rage. He had planned this from early in the development of Part 2. Joel's death was not a late decision, not a pivot forced by circumstances. It was the engine of the second game's entire moral argument, present in the design from the beginning. The argument is this, that grief produces grief, that the cycle of violence is not a metaphor, but a mechanism, that Abby Anderson, standing in that lodge with a golf club, is not a villain, but a mirror, a reflection of Joel himself at Salt Lake City, a person making the same choice from the other side of the same wound. Her father was taken from her by a man who loved someone else too much to let the calculus of the greater good operate. Her response to that taking was to build herself into someone who could take back. The loss made her, exactly as Sarah's loss had made Joel. This argument required Joel to die badly. It required the death to be ugly and humiliating and fast and too soon, because a heroic death would have provided catharsis, and catharsis would have provided release, and release would have allowed the audience to put the story down and walk away having felt something rather than having been changed by something. Druckmann did not want the audience to be able to put it down. He wanted them to carry it the way Joel carried the broken watch, not because it was useful, but because putting it down would mean admitting that it was over. The backlash was significant. The Last of Us Part 2 is among the most reviewed and re-reviewed cultural objects of its decade, precisely because the reaction it produced was so disproportionate to what games usually produce. People were genuinely angry, not theatrically angry, actually angry, in the way that you are angry when something you were not braced for arrives and removes something you had not prepared to lose. The anger was, itself, the proof that Druckmann had succeeded. You cannot be that angry about a character who did not matter to you. What matters is that the anger did not simplify the question. If anything, the anger made the question more complex, because some of the anger was at Abby, and some of it was at Druckmann, and some of it was at Joel himself for having set the chain in motion, and some of it was the purest and most indefensible kind of anger, which is the anger at a story for being true. The story is true. It is not true in the way that documented history is true. Joel Miller was not a real person. The cordyceps outbreak did not happen. The quarantine zones do not exist. But it is true in the way that the best fiction is always true. It describes something accurate about what people actually are and what they actually do, and what love actually costs when it is real enough to override every other consideration. Love, in Joel Miller's story, is not presented as a virtue. It is presented as a force, the way gravity is a force, or weather is a force. It operates regardless of whether it is convenient. It operates regardless of whether it serves the greater good. It pulled Joel to St. Mary's Hospital, the same way it pulled him to pick up a child with a broken ankle and carry her toward the river on the night the world ended. The same force, operating in the same direction, across 20 years and 2 daughters, and the distance between Texas and Utah, and every stop in between. He could not choose not to love Ellie. That was not available to him as an option. By the time he was at the hospital, it was already decided. Had been decided since Pittsburgh, probably. Since the elevator shaft, maybe. Since the first joke she pulled from the joke book to cut the tension of a ruined road. The choice he made was what to do with the love once it arrived, and the situation presented itself. And the choice he made was the one that the love demanded, regardless of what the rest of the world required. Joel Miller left behind a broken watch. He left behind a guitar with a moth engraved on the body, in the hands of a young woman who could not finish singing Future Days in a theater in Seattle because the song was too specifically his. He left behind a brother who cleaned his body on the night of January 1st and recognized the watch and understood, in the wordless way of people who have known each other their whole lives, everything that the watch meant and everything that its continued presence on Joel's wrist at the moment of his death said about the man who had worn it. He left behind a community in Jackson that he had helped build, Houses framed, pipes run, generators kept functional, the ordinary infrastructure of a life committed to the continuation of other lives. He left behind a therapy practice he had not finished, a process he had begun and was still in the middle of, the particular incompleteness of a man who had started to heal and was killed before the healing was done. He left behind Ellie Williams. What Ellie did with the grief of his death, the journey it sent her on, the things it cost her, the place she arrived at eventually, is Ellie's story, not Joel's. And Joel's story has the dignity of ending where it ended, in the lodge, with the watch, with the hand she held. The aftermath belongs to her, but the shape of her aftermath, the specific trajectory of it, the things she was willing to do and endure and sacrifice in the name of what happened to him, all of that is the measure of what he left in her. He left her the capacity to love that ferociously. Not only that, he left her the problem of it, because the capacity he built in her was also the capacity that nearly destroyed her, and she would have to spend years working out the relationship between loving someone completely and surviving the loss of them. He gave her that burden. He gave her that gift. In his story, as in most things about Joel Miller, the gift and the burden are the same object. He also left behind a question, not the question about whether he was right. That question will never resolve. It was designed not to resolve, and Druckmann has been honest enough to say so, even while offering his own position on it. The question Joel Miller leaves behind is smaller than that and more personal. It is the question that anyone who has ever loved someone more than they love the idea of doing the right thing eventually has to face. What would you have done? Not in the abstract, not philosophically, not as a thought experiment, not at safe remove. What would you have done, specifically, if you were the person who had carried a 12-year-old daughter in your arms until she stopped being warm, and had spent 20 years keeping yourself going by force of will through things you refused to name, and had found, in the absolute last place you expected to find anything, a reason to be alive again, and then been told that the reason had to die for the world? What would you have done? Most people, if they are honest, find that the answer shifts depending on where they are in their own lives when they ask it. If you are young and you have not yet lost anything that rewrote you, the answer tends toward the utilitarian. The cure matters more. One life for millions. The mathematics are clear. If you are older, if you have held someone while they died, if you know from experience what the space left by a specific person actually feels like, the mathematics get harder to trust. The millions are abstract. The person is not. Druckmann said, "I believe Joel was right." Marzin said, "I would probably have done what he did, but I'd like to think I wouldn't." Pedro Pascal said Joel did it because he found himself incapable of losing again. All three of them are describing the same thing from different angles. The thing is this, that the human capacity for love is not calibrated to the scale of history. It is calibrated to the scale of the person in front of you. It does not naturally expand to encompass billions of strangers. It contracts fiercely and almost involuntarily around the specific people whose loss would unmake you. Joel Miller was unmade once. He survived it barely, and only barely. He could not go back there. He chose, at the most consequential fork in the story of the post-apocalyptic world, not to go back there. The world paid for it. He paid for it later, in a different currency, at the hands of a young woman who was making the same kind of choice from the opposite side of the same wound. And somewhere in all of that, in the paying and the being paid back, and the cost accruing across both directions, is the specific truth that the story has been trying to say since the prologue. since the river, since the birthday cake he forgot, and the watch she fixed. Love is not a safe thing to have. It is not a comfortable thing, or a reasonable thing, or a thing that behaves according to the rules that govern everything else. It is the most dangerous force in any story, because it is the force that makes people capable of anything, the best things and the worst things, and the things that cannot be cleanly assigned to either category and will be argued about forever. Joel Miller loved 2 daughters across the span of a single ruined life. The first one died in his arms, and the second one lived because of what dying in his arms had made him willing to do. That is the whole story. Everything else is annotation. Let us end with the watch, not with the debate, not with the hospital, or the golf club, or the moral philosophy, with the watch, because the watch is where the story begins and where the story ends, and everything in between is the distance between those 2 points. Sarah Miller repaired the watch in secret. She was 12 years old, and her father was a man who worked long hours and sometimes forgot things and kept a broken timepiece without quite getting around to having it fixed. And she noticed this the way she noticed things about him, and she decided to do something about it. She slipped money from his jacket on a school morning. She brought the watch somewhere to be repaired. She wrapped it and gave it to him on the last ordinary night of both their lives. He wore it. It broke again that night, in the fall near the river, in the chaos of the worst hours either of them would ever experience. By the time it stopped working, Sarah was already gone. The watch was already, in the space of a single evening, both a gift from someone alive and a relic of someone dead. Joel kept it broken for 25 years. This is not a metaphor, or rather, it is absolutely a metaphor, and it is also absolutely a fact, and the power of it comes from both being true simultaneously. He kept the broken watch the way he kept everything that mattered and could not be fixed, not because it was useful, not because he was waiting to repair it, not out of sentimentality in the soft sense of the word. He kept it because putting it down would have required a relationship with the loss that he was not structurally capable of having. The watch being broken meant time had stopped, not literally. Joel understood perfectly well that time had not stopped, that it was continuing to move, that he was aging and the world was changing, and things were happening that required his continued participation. But the watch being broken meant that there was a version of time, the time in which Sarah was alive, in which his birthday was just a birthday, in which the future was a thing that could be planned for, that he was refusing to close. A working watch would have meant accepting that the time before the river was over. A working watch would have meant living entirely in the time after. He kept it broken for 25 years, across Boston and the dark years and the journey and the hospital and Jackson and the guitar birthday and Gail's therapy sessions and the conversation where Ellie told him the truth about what his choice had cost her. Through all of it, on his wrist or in his pocket, the watch that Sarah's 12-year-old hands had repaired in secret as a birthday surprise for a father she loved completely, ticked in whatever direction. Broken watches tick. And on January the 1st, 2029, when Tommy Miller cleaned his brother's body in Jackson among the dead and found it still on his wrist, Tommy, who had been there at the river, who had shot the soldier, who had watched Sarah die, who had gone back to Texas alone at some point to retrieve a photograph that Joel could not bear to keep, Tommy recognized it. He would have stood there for a moment, the way you stand when something small and specific contains everything large and general about a person you have known your whole life. The way grief sometimes arrives, not in the obvious places, but in the detail, not at the body, not at the fact of the death, but at the specific object on the wrist of the body, the worn strap, and the still hands, and the face of the watch that Sarah had touched when she was 12 and alive, and had not yet run out of time. The watch is where the story ends, because the watch is where it began, not with the outbreak, not with the infection or the cordyceps or the fall of civilization, with a girl who noticed her father's broken watch and decided to fix it, with the small, specific, entirely ordinary act of love that a 12-year-old performed for a tired man on the last night before everything, and the fact that he held on to it, through all of it, every last inch of it, until the very end. Joel Miller was born on September 26th in Arlington, Texas. He grew up in Austin. He worked with his hands. He raised his daughter alone. He played guitar. He dreamed once of being a singer. He survived the end of the world and did not survive surviving it intact. He did things in the dark years that he never named. He carried people's deaths sealed in compartments he controlled by force of will. He smuggled, and he fought, and he moved through the ruins of what had been a country with the specific efficiency of a man who has reduced himself to what the moment requires and nothing else. He carried a girl across a continent and fell in love with her, the way you fall in love with the thing that makes the world worth the trouble of being in it. He made the worst and most human choice of the entire story. He built a life in Wyoming. He attended therapy. He gave a guitar with a moth on it to a 19-year-old who had become, without ceremony or official arrangement, his daughter in every way that the word has ever meant anything. He went on patrol on New Year's morning and rescued a stranger from infected, and walked into a building full of people he did not know, and was killed by the daughter of the man he had killed, in a ski lodge, in the snow, with a broken golf club shaft, at 56 years old. He was wearing the watch. He is one of the greatest characters that the medium of interactive storytelling has ever produced. He is one of the greatest characters that the medium of television has amplified and extended and brought to an audience that did not know they needed him. He is, in the taxonomy of fictional people who do something real to the people who encounter them, who leave something behind in the room, even after the screen goes dark, one of the permanent ones. Not because he was good, not because he was right, not because the choices he made were the choices you would have made, or the choices the story endorses, or the choices that history would absolve. Because he was true. Because he was the thing that love looks like when it has been through enough to strip away every pretense and leave only the essential fact of it. Absolute, costly, incapable of compromise, and completely, irreversibly, catastrophically real. And so the story rests here, friend. If it stayed with you, if you find yourself in the dark after this, thinking about a watch that should have been repaired and never was, about a birthday cake that was forgotten on the last ordinary night, about a man who sang a song for a girl on her 15th birthday in a valley surrounded by mountains and meant every word of it, leave a small note below. I will be here again with another life, another long night, another quiet hour. Until then, this has been Mr. K. Law. Sleep well.